Okay, welcome back, everybody. We have just one more speaker to go, the last, but by no means least, of the entire day. So I'm going to hand over to Kat, who is from Synonym and is going to talk about how to secure alt protein manufacturing. So, Kat, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone who is joining for this session today. If you are staying on for this last session, thank you very much. Today, I will be sharing how to secure alternative protein manufacturing, pretty focused on alternative proteins that are produced using precision fermentation. But I think that actually, if you are doing alternative proteins that are not made by precision fermentation, this could still be very useful for you in terms of planning out an alternative protein production process, how to model that for financial success, and how to secure a long-term manufacturing partner, because that is something that the foundational requirements span multiple different industries, because at the end of the day, it is a partnership, just like any relationship that you would have with your coworkers or your personal partner or others. So I hope that even if you aren't doing precision fermentation, that this will be interesting and helpful for you. And I am really looking forward to getting some awesome questions at the end of it. So please think about it while I'm going through the presentation and share with them at the end, or of course in the Q&A that they've set up for today's meeting. So just to give everyone, if you don't know about Synonym, an overview. So our team comes from a very diverse background, from innovative startups to industry stalwarts that have been shaping the world and our lives for many years with their different products. Since Synonym's inception, our goal has really been to ensure that sustainable factories are producing the products of the future. And we've built a niche in the industry by digitalizing and standardizing the fermentation industrial development process. And we do this through developing databases of production capacity for different products, as well as making software that makes it very easy to plan for a infrastructure development project for different product production. I'm a chemical bioprocess engineer with a background in scaling up bioprocesses. So if you aren't familiar with alternative proteins made by precision fermentation, of course, alt proteins can be made in a many number of ways. And the one that I will be focusing on today is that in precision fermentation. This method is often chosen for proteins which are found in small concentrations in plants or animals. So imagine you find a sweet protein that is produced by this really cool plant in South Africa. But if you were to try to propagate that plant and grow it into a field like soybeans or something like that, it might not actually give you the concentrations that you're looking for if you're trying to use this sweet protein as a replacement for sugar, let's say, in different products. So it actually makes a lot more sense to take this sweet protein and produce it using microorganisms who can then produce it in a much higher concentration. This method is also used for proteins that are traditionally obtained through animal agriculture, like dairy or egg proteins. So you're still producing this protein that is very useful, very nutritious, but then you're not growing and potentially having human rights concerns with working with those animals. So what happens in this process is that the genetic DNA of the chosen protein is inserted into a microorganism's DNA so that the microorganism will produce that protein. And this can be done by having the microorganism produce the protein within itself or intracellularly, or by actually excreting it out into the media or the tank that the microorganism is growing in. And these organisms are grown in bulk in large tanks in a liquid medium. So they're submerged in, let's say, water, which is filled with the food that they need to grow. And the tank is also stirred and oxygen is added to give the best environment for these organisms to grow into large quantities. So once the protein is complete production in these tanks, the contents of the tank are emptied and sent through a process to obtain the pure protein. Because of course the contents of this bioreactor also includes the media that the cells were grown in, the cells themselves, and other things that the cells might have excreted while they grew that are not the product. So once the protein goes through this isolation purification process, you then have this pure product that goes into packaging and is either sold as the protein itself, or it's sent to another company to add it to their own product as an ingredient. So think of this process as not so different from obtaining whey protein from cow milk. Milk goes through a number of processes as well to first clean it, then obtain the different products that are isolated from it, and sometimes even the same purification equipment that is used for the protein purification from cow milk can actually be used for purifying the dairy proteins that are produced by microorganisms. So now that you know how fermentation is used for making alternative proteins, let's talk about the business case. Just like other processes that are used to produce traditional proteins like meat or alternative proteins like soy or pea protein, the production of the protein is a process with inputs and outputs. There are costs that go into this process, like the raw materials that are used, as well as the energy that is used to run the equipment and keep the fermenter going, the equipment itself, materials that are used to help purify the product, and packaging that is used to contain it. These are all inputs which dictate the cost of the product, or how we often refer to it, the costs of goods sold. You can only have a sustainable business if you're able to sell that product for more than the cost to make it. And often you actually need to sell it for a significant amount more than the cost it takes to make it. And if we're talking about alternative proteins, this is so key because we're talking about alternatives. That means that there is already a benchmark that companies are working against and drives the goal for the price for the products that are now being produced by precision fermentation or by another alternative protein process. So this is why it is so important to model the process of producing an alternative protein. And that doesn't just relate to alternative proteins being produced by precision fermentation. Every single process that produces a product requires a business case evaluation and an estimated cost to produce. So it's imperative to identify all of the costs that go into making a product, to be able to model them and get an accurate estimate in order to set milestones for the business and make business decisions. And this picture here, the diagram that we have, is an example of a process being modeled in our software called Roebling. You can see that there's all these different connections between the different parts of the process that go into what really makes a strong model. And you can see how different costs relate and can be affected by one another. But at the end of the day, you need something that identifies all these costs, something that is designed to fit with the CMO, something where you've analyzed what are the best ways to put this process together to be the most cost effective. And by modeling, your team will also know if the process will indeed be profitable in the long term, and the milestones to get there. And one thing that I really want to note, how important it is at the beginning to model how this product will be made, because that is going to inform the manufacturing strategy. The process must be designed in a way that it will be possible to commercialize by manufacturing. And that can be manufacturing either with a manufacturing partner or what's called a CMO or contract manufacturing organization, or with your own facility or another facility that maybe you design with a strategic partner. So let's talk a bit more about the key process decisions that go into an alternative protein process. One of those major decisions is the organism. Every organism has different needs and abilities, and some can only really produce intracellularly, meaning that as part of the purification process, You would need to break the cell open to get the protein out, so you need a special equipment to do that. Other organisms can produce the protein, like I said, by extracellularly putting it into the rest of the liquid that is in the fermenter. However, one of the organisms that can do this, which is also one of the most popular organisms to use for alternative proteins, also requires methanol to be fed to grow. And methanol is a flammable alcohol, which means that the tanks that these organisms are grown in need to have explosion-proof capabilities, and the facility needs to have safety measures in place to be able to handle the methanol, and sometimes even specific wastewater treatment. So by having an organism that requires methanol feed, this reduces the number of potential contract manufacturers around the world who could potentially produce the protein. And this map just shows an example of the different possible number of CMOs around the world who can handle methanol feed versus not. Another major decision that impacts manufacturing capabilities and strategy is the protein purification process. So getting that protein from the fermenter to its final form that can be used as a product. I've seen three major routes that companies take. The first is the expensive option. So this usually includes unit operations that are typically more expensive to operate, but they're less common amongst industrial CMOs. There might be a good reason for this, however, like this unit operation is similar to what is already used to process the incumbent product, which makes the process more attractive to, let's say, a large B2C company who may want to purchase your technology, or it might give them more confidence that this process can actually be completed and there's less risk because this equipment is already in use and has been shown to make the incumbent product at the right rates and the right purity and concentrations. So the second easier to find option includes operations that are more common amongst other fermentation processes, and they're generally more available at CMOs, allowing for the highest number of potential manufacturing partners with potentially trade-off with yield and purity. So you might be using pieces of equipment that give you more manufacturing options, but these pieces of equipment might not be the best to purify your specific product, meaning that the final yields and purities might go down. The third approach that I've seen is the bespoke option. And this usually involves a process that has an unusual unit operation or group of operations or a process flow that make it unique to that particular team or product. And this proprietary process might lead to significant benefits in terms of yield or purity, but it is likely capital intensive, either at a CMO, so a CMO might have the space to put in this equipment, but they're gonna ask you as the company to pay for all this equipment to go in, or there might not even be an option to work at a CMO, and your only option would be to build your own facility. So when choosing a manufacturing partner, there are a number of factors to think about and use in this decision-making process. Number one, partner, of course, needs to be a strong technical fit. Do they have the equipment that's required for the process? If they don't have all of the equipment, how do they intend to get the other equipment required? How long is it going to take to get that equipment? Do they have the required quality standards in place so that when you send this product out, it meets those certifications that your customers are looking for? The partner also needs to have a budget fit, meaning that if you've done all of this modeling and you know how much you need the cost of your product to be, and you need a manufacturing partner that can hit the number or even be lower than that. So there might be facilities out there who have all the technical equipment required, but if you're producing alternative proteins and that particular partner normally produces pharmaceuticals, it's unlikely that they'll be able to hit your manufacturing price point. Thirdly, does the partner have availability or is able to install the right equipment and become familiar with your process in the time that you've promised to your customers or your own schedule? Another big criteria is logistics. How does the CMO or contract manufacturer deal with shipping and handling? Do they have a team that can help you based where they are if you're working with a region that you're not familiar with? And if not, do you have a team who can manage that? One of the items that gets brought up a lot is if the manufacturer has the experience that is required for the process. Have they worked with that organism before? Have they produced a similar protein in the past? How many years have they been producing similar products? How many years of experience do they have with precision fermentation? Their experience can dictate the success of this project. And lastly, and most importantly, just like a job interview process, ensuring that there's a good cultural or relational fit between you and that manufacturer. Can you easily communicate with them? How has the process of interrelational communication been throughout the time that you've been talking to them, even if it's just a few preliminary conversations? What is their policy on failed batches? Do you know anyone who has worked with them before that you can ask questions to get more insights to how they are as a partner? So now that we've identified all these really important aspects of a partner, actually going out and finding the partners to evaluate and then choosing the right one or ones can actually be really frustrating. So even if you know where to go and which CMOs you're interested in, going from cold outreach to establishing an NDA with them can actually still take quite a bit of time to get through legal revisions for each CMO conversation. So let's say you're trying to talk to 15 different CMOs, you need NDAs with every single one of them. From there, you'll need to start an initial tech transfer and have a series of calls to help the CMO understand your process and requirements so that they can build a quote for you. Until the CMO learns enough about your process, there's still no guarantee that their facility will take you on or if they'll be within budget. And this process can drag on, requiring lots of different calls to explain your process back and forth on Excel sheets and things like that. And if you've made it this far, you'll still need further calls for diligence to evaluate your options. And in the end, everything can look perfect. You still need to confirm that they have the availability for you in the time that you need it. And you'll also want to probably do some site visits before signing up with these CMOs. So this process can be quite challenging. And we at Synonym have developed this network of facilities where we already have NDAs in place with them. We already know a lot of good detail about their facilities. So it does actually help people to get through this process much quicker and ideally get to production and manufacturing much faster as well. So I just want to share conversations that we've had and stories that we've heard about must-haves for a successful commercial partnership. We've had the opportunity to hear from a number of people who've shared their insights. And so I put together the top 5 that I've heard the most frequently. The first of these is trust. The manufacturing partner, they have their own culture, they have their own processes, and you won't always be able to or want to know every single detail of what's happening while they make your product, because you also want to be focusing on getting customers, doing R&D and other things. Otherwise, you would just build your own facility, which may or may not be realistic for you. So choosing a partner that you believe you can trust and have a foundational relationship is very important. It's also important that they can trust you. So making sure that you share everything about the process, the potential risks, and the way that failures have been overcome will ensure the highest probability for success. Secondly, ensuring that there's clear responsibility and process for logistics early on in the relationship and on an ongoing basis will prevent batch delays, shipping delays, and other things that can go wrong when you aren't thinking about your logistics. So make sure that both teams are aligned on scheduling and who's responsible for that. Thirdly, having a risk plan in place in writing and signed by both parties is very key. Things will go wrong, and when they do, having a strong prevention and repair strategy could be the difference between 6 months of lost product versus a few weeks. Fourth, again, a communication management plan. Having a dedicated project team who are consistent throughout the project and who have a strong communication strategy can help prevent those risks from happening. And lastly, having a resilient supply chain. So not just having one of these good partners, having multiple. I've heard this again and again, that companies who might be wanting to purchase your product are only looking to work with you if you have multiple suppliers, meaning that you have a more resilient supply chain, and there's less probability that they're going to miss out on getting your product to their customers. And that's everything that I will share for today for my slides, but excited to share any more insights from questions if possible. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll dive straight in with the questions if I may. I think it's interesting that you mentioned there the kind of, this lengthy process of signing NDAs and legal. And earlier in the day, we heard from a company that was talking a lot about sort of intellectual property and patents and this kind of stuff. Given that complexity, some people, and you did mention this briefly, may be tempted to kind of build their own facility for the purposes of protecting their IP and to avoid a lot of those complications. What are the trade-offs there in terms of trying to do it yourself versus going through a CMO?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest trade-off is money, right? If you're building your own facility, you're investing, $100 to $200 million upfront to make this. You're also maybe making a trade-off on time. So potentially waiting, a few years for that facility to be up and running, to be able to send your products to customers in large amounts. I think we've looked at building facilities for a long time, and we saw that there's a lot of challenges to getting that funding, especially if the technology provider or the startup or whoever's looking to build that facility doesn't already have orders in place for the product that's going to be produced by that facility. So I've only seen like one or two successful stories of someone actually being able to take that route of building their own facility, but the majority of people, at least in this space that I've seen, are using CMOs.
No, I mean, that makes sense. And so I love the fact that you were sort of, you talked through the pathways and trade-offs. And I think that's a really, valuable approach to this because there is always a trade-off to everything, right? So bearing in mind everything that you've talked about, what does what's an example of a kind of successful alt protein manufacturing story?
One that I shared recently that others might have seen in the news was AmSilk and Evonik. So AmSilk produces silk proteins using precision fermentation, and Evonik is a company that does contract manufacturing services as well as producing their own products. And I think that they are a good success story to see that they're choosing to work together in an environment where it's difficult to secure that long-term partnership. So that's one that I saw in the news recently that was successful. And I think they did share some points in that story of why they got to the point where they could build a successful partnership.
Okay. Yeah. And conversely, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be an example because I realize this can be a difficult topic, but when it comes to those that are unsuccessful, what goes wrong most frequently and where does it most often fall down in this process?
I think where I've heard the most issues is number one is probably in that relationship building and having expectations early on and having transparency in the relationship. So there has been some news about alternative protein companies who were not fully transparent about their long-term plan with their manufacturing partner, which then led to that relationship going sour and potentially not looking great for the company itself in terms of how they treat the people that they work with. So that's a pretty big one, and those stories aren't always going to be in the news, but I think that's what's most important is understanding who you're going to work with from the beginning and being transparent about how you're going to work together. so that you don't have hiccups down the line, because it is a long-term relationship. It's like hiring almost a C-suite person on your team. This is someone that you're going to be working with for a long time, who you're going to be depending on to get your product out into the market.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting way of framing actually, is thinking about it as a C-suite person, because you wouldn't ever do that without a relationship of deep trust, right? So,
Yeah,
take the same approach if you're looking for a partner. It's a great way to close things out, definitely. Kat, thank you so much for being with us today, and giving us that presentation and helping people think through all of that. If you have further questions that you'd like to ask Kat, do reach out to her in the platform or elsewhere, on LinkedIn or such like. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them. That does
absolutely.
bring us to the close of day one. Um, it's been an amazing day, really. Certainly, we've had lots of interesting speakers here on stage two, not least Kat, of course, talking about all sorts of things, from deep science of Lego proteins and all sorts of clever things, through to sort of commercial considerations right across the board, really. So I think that's been really valuable. The event platform is going to remain open for attendees. You can still come on here. You can go back and view things. You can connect with people. You can do all of that stuff until day two, which is coming a week from now on the 28th. I won't be here for that one, but my colleague Derek will be. So do come back on the second day, um, with sessions starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, 8:55, I think, technically. Yeah, day one session recordings will be available by the 24th of November. So you'll be able to go back and watch all of these presentations again, enjoy them all over again, which is great. In the meantime, yeah, I do encourage you all, continue to use the platform, get out there, talk to each other, talk to the speakers that we've had, exhibitors, attendees, partners, etc., etc. Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you to you. And yeah, that brings us to a close. Have a great rest of your Friday and a good weekend. Thank you very much.